Imagine walking into a boardroom. Like, your data is completely flawless.
Oh, absolutely airtight.
Right. Your preparation is airtight. You have run the numbers so many times you could probably recite them backward in your sleep.
You're just totally ready.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then the moment you sit down or the moment those little video squares pop up on your screen, you realize something. You realize the rules of engagement have completely shifted.
Yeah, the vibe just changes instantly.
It really does, because you aren't being measured on your spreadsheet anymore. You are being measured on your accent.
Or your age, right?
Or your age.
Right.
Or your gender. Or simply the fact that you're the only person in the room who looks like you.
Which is such an incredibly heavy realization to have in real time.
It is. It's universally frustrating. And today, for this deep dive, we are looking at the actual biological and psychological cost of that exact moment.
We're getting into the actual science of it, which is so crucial.
Right. We're exploring that agonizing and honestly often invisible gap between what a high-performing person actually achieves and what they are permitted to claim in a professional space.
Because those two things are very rarely the same, unfortunately.
No, they're not. So our mission today is to break down this gap, and we're drawing entirely on the phenomenal work of Maria Fuentes.
Yes, her 2026 research.
Yeah, published under Hypnotica Mente LTB. She breaks down what she calls the quiet tax.
The quiet tax. Such a perfect phrase for it.
It really is. It's this massive cognitive toll paid by professionals who are judged on identity rather than their actual, literal output.
And it's a phenomenon that professionals deal with every single day, right?
Right.
But it rarely makes it into performance reviews.
Oh, never. It's totally off the books.
Exactly. It's not in the quarterly reports. And what makes Fuentes' framework so vital here is that it completely sidesteps the usual corporate platitudes.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. Like, we aren't going to talk about leaning in today. We are going to look at the neurological reality of walking into a room where your evidence is on trial simply because of who you are.
Which happens all the time.
All the time. We're looking at what actually happens in the brain and how that biased environment forces top-tier professionals to carry their competence entirely differently from their peers.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really grasp the modern subtle versions of this bias, the stuff that happens in our offices today, we first have to look at a historical precedent.
Yeah, we have to go back in time a bit to see it clearly.
We do. We need to look at one of the most blatant, visible examples of this in action. A moment where it wasn't hidden behind, corporate jargon.
Or subjective metrics, yeah.
Right. It was just put on display for the entire world. So we are going back to 1911.
1911 in Paris.
And we're talking about Marie Curie.
If you want to isolate the variable of identity bias, Marie Curie in 1911 is she's the ultimate control subject.
She really is. Because at that point in history, she wasn't just, a successful scientist. She was already a paradigm-shifting historical figure.
She had literally changed science.
Yeah. Let's just ground this in the reality of what she had actually done for a second. In 1903, she wins the Nobel Prize in physics.
For spontaneous radiation, right?
Exactly. She discovers polonium, she discovers radium. She literally coins the term radioactivity.
She invented the word.
She invented the entire concept for the world. And then, in 1911, she wins a second Nobel Prize.
In chemistry this time.
Yes, in chemistry, for the isolation of radium. So she is the first person in human history to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields.
The first person ever, man or woman.
Right. So you as a listener, just think about that resume. The debate over her capability wasn't just settled. It was a complete non-issue.
She was reshaping the fundamental understanding of matter itself. Her evidence was absolute. It was undeniable.
But then we get January of 1911, right?
Yeah, the French Académie des Sciences.
Which was the absolute pinnacle of scientific recognition in France.
It was the room. If you wanted to be formally acknowledged by the establishment, you had to be in that room.
And they held a vote on whether to admit her as a full member. And despite being objectively one of the most important scientists to have ever lived, she was rejected.
Which is just wild to even say out loud.
It's insane. And it wasn't like a landslide rejection where the whole institution was united against her science. She lost the vote by a margin of exactly 2 votes.
2 votes.
Yeah, to a physicist named Edward Branly.
Who, was a respectable scientist.
Sure, yeah. He did important early work on wireless telegraphy. But let's put this in perspective. It's like winning 2 back-to-back MVP awards in a sports league right now.
Yeah, you are undeniably the best player.
You are the best player on the planet, and the league owners literally vote to lock you out of the team clubhouse because of where you were born.
It's absurd. Comparing Brantley to Curie in 1911 is like, I don't know, comparing a very good mid-level regional manager to the founder of a trillion-dollar industry.
That's a perfect analogy. The disparity in their actual scientific output was just staggering.
What's fascinating here is that this disparity is what makes this historical moment so crucial for our understanding of the quiet tax.
How so?
Well, in modern professional settings, bias is almost always obscured by muddy water, right? Like, if someone doesn't get a promotion today, the committee can hide behind subjective metrics.
Oh, totally. They'll say things like, she lacked executive presence.
Exactly. Or, he wasn't a cultural fit.
Or they just had a slight edge in strategic thinking, all that vague stuff.
Right. There is always plausible deniability. They can
Mhm.
always point to something soft. But in 1911, the Académie des Sciences had absolutely nowhere to hide.
Because the numbers were right there.
Yes,
Yeah.
they could not mathematically or scientifically argue that Edward Brantley was a superior scientist to Marie Curie. It was impossible.
So the rejection was purely, undeniably about identity.
100%. She was a woman, and she was foreign-born, having emigrated from Poland.
And the institution had literally never admitted a woman to full membership.
Never.
And what's wild, what really gets me, is the sheer stubbornness of that identity bias when you look at the timeline. It took them another 50 years to finally admit a woman to full membership.
50 years?
Yeah, Marguerite Perret in 1962. Half a century of keeping the door locked purely to preserve the demographic makeup of the room.
It's a staggering commitment to bias. But, how Curie handled that rejection is what really sets up the modern problem we need to talk about.
Right, because later in 1911, the door in Paris is slammed in her face. So what does she do? She travels to Stockholm.
She goes and gets her second Nobel Prize.
Exactly. She accepts her award, she ignores the closed door in Paris, and she just goes back to her lab and continues her work.
She forces the historical record to reflect reality, basically.
She did. And her resilience is just incredible, right? It's why she's held up as this historical icon.
But, and this is a big but, we have to be very careful not to let the legend obscure the reality of her lived experience.
Yeah, because she paid a huge price.
A massive price. To exist in that space, to continue producing world-changing science, while being overtly rejected by the establishment of your adopted country. I mean, she paid a massive tax.
She faced public scrutiny, media smear campaigns that targeted her foreign origin.
Exactly. The sheer exhausting friction of having to prove herself in an environment that fundamentally did not want her there. She paid the tax in one massive, historic, visible rejection.
But while that's historical, most of us, most of the people listening to this right now, we aren't going to face a formal recorded vote on our fundamental right to exist in our profession.
No, thankfully that kind of blatant institutional lockout is pretty rare today.
Right. So to understand modern bias, we have to realize it doesn't usually look like a closed oak door in Paris anymore.
It really doesn't. The modern version is internalized. It's 1,000 microscopic adjustments made over the course of a career.
It's the subtle stuff.
Yeah, it is the subtle daily friction that Fuentes profiles in her work. And she illustrates this through the example of a modern professional she calls Fatima.
Let's break down Fatima's reality, because I think a lot of our listeners are going to recognize this instantly.
I'm sure they will.
So Fatima is a senior specialist in a highly technical field. Her baseline is that she is brilliant at what she does.
Much like Curie, the raw data of her performance is just rock solid.
Exactly. She is one of the strongest performers in her organization. But in the rooms that actually dictate the future of her company, like the strategy meetings, the boardrooms, those high-stakes project kickoffs, she is almost always the only woman.
And often the only person from her specific cultural background, too.
Right. And this is where the quiet tax shifts from a historical anecdote to a deeply insidious psychological burden for Fatima.
Because nobody in Fatima's company is formally voting to keep her out of the room. She technically has a seat at the table.
Right. She's in the meeting. But being the only one in that room subjects her to this constant, low-level scrutiny that her peers simply do not experience.
Her technical skills aren't necessarily openly questioned, but the environment itself forces her to carry her competence defensively.
They're just so incredibly recognizable.
They are very specific.
Yeah. The first one is that Fatima prepares twice as hard as her peers for the exact same meeting.
Twice as hard.
And then, before she even opens her mouth, she qualifies her strongest points to soften them.
Oh, the qualifiers.
Right. She'll say things like, I might be slightly off base here, but before delivering a mathematically proven insight.
Which is just agonizing to watch.
It is. And worst of all, she uses uptalk. She states absolute certainties as if they were questions.
Yes.
She has the hard evidence, but she presents it as a suggestion.
It is a profound linguistic and behavioral adaptation.
Yeah.
I mean, she is essentially shrinking her footprint in the room to avoid triggering the latent identity bias of the people around her.
But wait, I need to push back slightly on this specific point.
Okay, sure.
Because if I'm looking at this from a standard management perspective, isn't preparing twice as hard just the definition of being a rigorous, dedicated professional?
It looks like it, yes.
I mean, if you are going into a high-stakes meeting with the board, you should know every single data point. You should have anticipated every single counter-argument.
That's the conventional wisdom.
So how do we separate good, solid work ethic from this quiet tax you're talking about? Because from the outside, over-preparation just looks like extreme dedication.
And that is the exact trap that keeps this tax invisible. It's incredibly easy for management to look at Fatima and say, wow, she's so dedicated, she's always so thoroughly prepped.
Right, they praise her for it.
They do. But you have to look at the biological and psychological motivation driving the behavior.
Yeah.
Because there are two distinct types of preparation.
Okay, what are they?
Well, there is developmental preparation, where you are pushing the boundaries of your knowledge, trying to master new material or stretch your cognitive ability.
Just studying for a test you haven't taken yet.
Exactly. That is rigor. That is a healthy work ethic. But Fatima is not doing that.
No.
No. Fatima already knows the material. She built the models herself. She is the senior specialist. The extra 3 hours she spends on a Sunday night reviewing data she already knows, cold, is not developmental. It is defensive preparation.
So she isn't preparing to succeed, she's preparing to survive.
That's exactly it. She is anticipating a room where her margin for error is effectively zero.
Wow.
Think about it. A colleague who fits the traditional demographic mold of leadership can walk into that exact same strategy meeting, pitch an idea, and just say, hey, I haven't run the final projections on Q4 yet, but the trend looks solid.
And the room just nods. They're like, great insight, Bob.
Exactly. They grant that person the benefit of the doubt based on their baseline credibility. But Fatima's nervous system has learned, through years of empirical evidence, that she does not get that benefit of the doubt.
Right. If she says that, they question her competence.
If she misses a minor data point on a slide, it won't be viewed as a simple oversight. It will be subconsciously weaponized by the room as proof that she doesn't truly belong at that level.
So she burns hours and hours of her personal time insulating herself against a judgment that has nothing to do with her actual job description.
Exactly. And when you frame it like that, defensive versus developmental, the compounding cost of this over a career is just staggering.
It really is. Fuentes breaks down the external costs, and they read like a very slow, quiet, professional death by 1,000 cuts.
Because of the softening, right?
Yeah, because Fatima softens her language, because she frames her expertise as suggestions rather than directives, her promotions arrive a year or two later than her peers.
Always lagging just a bit behind.
And we've all seen this happen. She introduces a brilliant strategy with a qualifier. The room completely ignores it.
And then 10 minutes later.
10 minutes later, a louder voice repeats the exact same strategy with absolute certainty and gets all the credit.
It's maddening.
And those coveted board seats, they remain just out of reach because she is perceived as lacking, quote-unquote, command.
Right. And those external costs are deeply frustrating. But Fuentes makes a really critical observation here. The external costs are just the symptom. The true damage is actually internal.
The internal tax.
Yes. The most insidious aspect of the quiet tax is that the external bias of the corporate environment eventually becomes an internal automated habit.
Meaning she internalizes the locked door. She becomes her own Académie des Sciences.
Precisely. When a highly capable human being is repeatedly weighed on their identity in high-stakes environments, they learn to preempt the judgment.
It becomes like a reflex.
It's a survival mechanism. She makes herself smaller before the room even asks her to. And the terrifying thing about neurological habits is that they operate completely independent of logic and they outlast any single environment.
Oh, that makes so much sense. This means Fatima could leave this company.
She could quit tomorrow.
She could get recruited by a phenomenal progressive organization with a genuinely equitable leadership team. She could walk into a room where absolutely no one is judging her on her identity.
Yes.
And yet she will still spend 3 hours over-preparing on Sunday night, and she will still use Uptalk because her nervous system is running an outdated script.
She is paying a tax on a room that hasn't even charged her.
She is paying the bill before it even arrives.
Exactly. And that takes an immense amount of physical and mental energy.
Which brings us to a really important juncture in this conversation, because I think it is very easy to listen to Fatima's story and think of it purely as an emotional issue.
Right, like she just needs to toughen up or something. Right, to think that she just needs to build up her self-esteem, or that this feeling of being scrutinized is just a subjective psychological quirk that's all in her head.
But I'm wondering aloud here, is there actual hard science backing up this phenomenon?
Oh, absolutely. What the research shows us is that this isn't just a feeling. It is a highly measurable biological reality.
Okay, let's pivot to the hard science here, because this is where the concept of the quiet tax moves from, theoretical observation to undeniable physiological fact.
Yes, this is where it gets grounded in data.
Fuentes grounds this dynamic in the foundational psychological research on stereotype threat. We have to look at the 1995 study by Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson.
Published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology.
Exactly. If you want to understand what is actually happening inside Fatima's brain during that board meeting, this study is the absolute blueprint.
It really is. Steele and Aronson completely revolutionized how we understand human performance under social pressure.
How so? Like, what were people thinking before this?
Well, prior to this research, if a marginalized group systematically underperformed on standardized metrics, the societal assumption often leaned heavily toward a deficit model.
Meaning they thought there was just a lack of ability?
Right, an assumption of lower innate ability or maybe less rigorous educational background. But Steele and Aronson wanted to test a completely different hypothesis. They wanted to know what happens when a person is actively aware of a negative stereotype about their group while they're trying to perform a complex task.
And the methodology they used for this was just brilliant in its simplicity.
It was so elegant.
They took groups of African American and white college students, all highly academic, high-achieving individuals, and gave them sections of the GRE.
The Graduate Record Examination.
Right, which, if you don't know, is a highly difficult standardized test used for grad school admissions. It's tough.
It requires a lot of cognitive power.
But the trick of the study wasn't the test itself. The trick was how they framed the test to the students before they took it.
The framing was the entire experiment. In the first condition, they told the students that the test was diagnostic of their intellectual ability.
Meaning?
They essentially said, this test will measure how smart you are. And for the African American students, this framing immediately activated a societal stereotype threat.
Because there's a historical, negative societal narrative about race and intelligence.
Exactly. That societal narrative that questions their intellectual capability was suddenly tangibly hanging in the air in that testing room.
And what happened? In that diagnostic condition, the African American students significantly underperformed compared to their equally qualified white peers.
But here is the critical part, and this is what we really need to underline in thick red ink. It had absolutely nothing to do with their actual intelligence or their ability to answer those specific questions.
Right. And we know this definitively because of the second condition they ran.
Yes.
Steele and Aronson took another group of similarly qualified students and gave them the exact same difficult GRE test. But this time, they completely changed the framing.
They changed the script.
They told the students that the test was non-diagnostic. They literally said, this is just a laboratory problem-solving task. We are trying to understand the psychology of problem solving. It is not a measure of your personal intelligence.
So they removed the threat.
Yeah.
They took the societal stereotype completely off the table.
And the results were immediate and profound. When the threat was removed, the performance gap vanished completely.
Completely disappeared.
The African American students performed identically to the white students. The innate ability was exactly the same across the board.
The only variable that changed was the psychological environment in which the brain was being asked to operate.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because
Yeah.
I want to talk about the biological why here.
Yeah, let's get into the mechanics of it.
Because it's so easy to hear that study and think, oh, well, they just got nervous.
Right. People dismiss it as test anxiety.
But it's so much deeper than standard test anxiety. It's actually about how the brain allocates its finite resources. It's like trying to run a complex software program on your computer while a massive, invisible background update is draining the CPU.
That's a great way to look at it.
Think of your brain's working memory like a computer's RAM. If you are rendering a massive 4K video, your computer needs all of its RAM dedicated to that one task, right?
Right. You can't be doing 10 other things.
Exactly. So if you try to run the GRE, or in Fatima's case, a complex corporate strategy presentation, you need your prefrontal cortex fully engaged. But stereotype threat acts like a massive, invisible, malicious background process.
It hijacks the system.
The moment the threat is activated, your amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection center, sounds a massive alarm.
And that is exactly what is happening on a physiological level. The amygdala perceives a threat to your social standing and, by extension, your safety.
And your brain prioritizes survival over everything else.
Over everything. So it instantly redirects cognitive resources away from the prefrontal cortex, where the complex math and the strategic thinking happen, and it diverts them toward threat management.
Wow.
It starts actively monitoring the environment. It starts suppressing anxiety. It starts calculating, did they look at me funny when I said that? Or am I confirming the stereotype right now?
So your computer isn't broken, your hardware is top of the line, the software you're trying to run is perfect, but your system resources have just been hijacked by this background update that you can't control.
Of course, the video rendering slows to a crawl.
Right. The cognitive load is simply too heavy. You are asking the brain to simultaneously solve a high-level cognitive problem while actively defending its right to exist in the room.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this science fundamentally shifts the blame. And 4 years later, in 1999, Stephen Spencer, Claude Seale, and Diane Quinn replicated this exact mechanism in a different context.
Which really cemented how universal this biological response is, right?
Exactly. They published a study in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology focusing on women and mathematics.
Right. They took highly qualified men and women people who had the exact same advanced mathematical background and gave them an incredibly difficult math test.
And again, they isolated the variable through framing.
Just like the first study. When the researchers told the room this specific test usually produces gender differences, obviously implying that men typically do better, the stereotype threat was activated.
The alarm goes off.
The women's amygdalas fired up, that background process started draining their working memory, and they underperformed relative to the men.
But when the researchers took the next group and said, this test has been shown to produce absolutely no gender differences, the threat was completely neutralized.
The background program closed.
The background program closed, and the women's performance perfectly matched the men's. They literally turned a performance gap on and off like a light switch, purely by manipulating the threat of identity judgment.
Which brings us right back to Fatima's reality. And honestly, the reality of so many people listening right now. The environment doesn't have to be overtly hostile to trigger this biological hijack.
Not at all.
The people in Fatima's boardroom don't have to make a sexist joke or explicitly question her credentials. The room doesn't have to say a single word.
The silence can do it.
Yes. The mere awareness that she is the only one and the historical knowledge that people like her are judged differently is more than enough to trigger the cognitive drain.
And this science fundamentally changes how we have to look at the quiet tax. It dismantles the argument that the exhaustion high performers feel is a personal failing or just a lack of resilience.
Right. It's not a weakness.
It proves that the threat of being judged on identity is an active, external, highly disruptive variable that literally steals mental bandwidth.
Which makes this standard corporate response to this issue not just ineffective, but actively insulting.
Very much so.
Because if this is a deeply ingrained, resource-draining cognitive response, right, a biological response, then the advice we give professionals in these situations is completely disconnected from reality.
You're referring to the typical professional development industrial complex.
Oh, yes. The seminars on imposter syndrome.
The empowerment workshops.
The endless, well-meaning advice from mentors telling people to, lean in or just back yourself or fake it till you make it.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And if Fatima comes to her manager and says she feels exhausted and unsupported in these meetings, the manager usually tells her she just needs more confidence.
They tell her to own the room.
Right. But if we look at the science we just discussed, telling Fatima to be more confident is like telling someone whose laptop is completely bogged down by a massive background virus that they just need to type faster on the keyboard.
That is such a good way to put it. It completely ignores the operating system.
It does. And that is the core argument Fuentes makes in her work. She points out that the language of empowerment is completely insufficient because it assumes the problem is a logic deficit.
A logic deficit.
Yeah, it assumes Fatima doesn't know she's good at her job, that she somehow forgot she's an expert. But Fatima isn't suffering from a lack of logic. She knows her resume, she knows the data, she doesn't need to be convinced of her own competence.
So what is the actual issue then?
The issue is entirely rooted in the nervous system. Years of navigating rooms where she is the only one has trained her nervous system to associate high visibility with danger.
Wow.
Her brain has learned, through repeated exposure, that competence alone will not protect her from scrutiny or rejection.
Right. So the nervous system, which we know is incredibly intelligent and highly adaptive.
It developed a survival strategy.
Yeah.
And that strategy is preempt the judgment, make yourself small, soften your language, over-prepare so perfectly that there is absolutely no surface area for attack.
It is a brilliant short-term survival mechanism.
It keeps you safe in the moment.
Oh, but it is disastrous as a long-term professional strategy. You cannot undo a deeply ingrained survival mechanism with a corporate pep talk.
You really can't.
When your sympathetic nervous system is activated, when your brain is literally screaming that you are in a socially unsafe environment, reciting affirmations in the mirror before the meeting is not going to turn off the alarm.
It barely scratches the surface.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, if you find yourself acting like Fatima? If the standard advice is useless, how do you actually reclaim that hijacked cognitive load?
Well, Fuentes argues that the solution has to address the threat response at the exact level where it was formed.
The nervous system.
Exactly. We have to stop talking about logic and reassurance and start talking about nervous system regulation and safety. The transition from merely surviving the quiet tax to actually dismantling it requires a biological approach.
Okay, what does that look like practically?
You have to train the nervous system to recognize that while the external room might still be structurally biased because the room hasn't changed, your internal panic response is no longer serving you. You have to create an internal sense of safety that is completely decoupled from the room's evaluation of you.
And Fuentes provides a very specific practical timeline for this work, which I find really interesting. She points to the corporate calendar and she highlights the summer, specifically July, as the crucial window of opportunity.
July is the magic month for this.
Right, because for most of the year, we are moving way too fast to even notice these autonomic responses. We are just reacting, meeting to meeting, quarter to quarter.
Just trying to keep our heads above water.
Exactly. But July introduces a lull. You know, people are on vacation, out-of-office replies are on. The calendar loosens up just enough for you to actually observe your own behavioral patterns.
And the timing there is critical because the corporate environment operates on cycles. If you don't deliberately use that summer window to interrupt the pattern, September will arrive with brutal force.
Oh, September is always a shock to the system.
And with September comes the exact same meetings, the exact same power dynamics, and the exact same unconscious habit of shrinking and over-preparing. The cycle just simply repeats unless you put an intentional wedge in the wheel.
So to provide that wedge, Fuentes outlines specific psychological interventions. One of the programs she designed is called the 10-Day Rewire Experience.
Yes, I was looking at that.
What's fascinating about it is that it's priced at 47 times, which deliberately democratizes access to this kind of high-level psychological intervention rather than locking it behind, expensive executive coaching that only CEOs get.
Which is so important because the people who need it most often don't have the budget for a $5,000 coach.
Exactly. But the mechanics of the program are what really matter here. It's built on 8 progressive levels, and it centers on something she calls performance labs.
And the concept of the performance lab is absolutely essential for nervous system change.
Why is that?
Because you cannot just read a book about somatic regulation and expect your behavior in a high-stakes board meeting to change. The body has to physically experience the new reality.
It has to feel it.
Right. These labs are designed as spaces for active nervous system rehearsal. It's an environment where a professional can literally practice holding their space, delivering their evidence without any qualifiers, and physically experiencing what it feels like to occupy a room at full height without triggering an internal panic attack.
It's essentially exposure therapy for corporate trauma. You rehearse the exact scenario that usually triggers the quiet tax, but you do it in a controlled environment until the body realizes, oh, I am safe.
Exactly. You rewrite the physical script.
And for those who need a more intense intervention, she also mentions the summer reset. This is a highly targeted, one-to-one practice focused on changing just one specific behavioral pattern before September hits.
Just one thing.
Right, maybe it's eliminating uptalk,
Hmm.
or maybe it's cutting meeting prep time in half. But the goal is singular and focused.
What all of these interventions share is a fundamental shift in perspective. They move the locus of control back to the individual.
Right, because you can't control the room.
Exactly. The goal is not to fix the biased room. The room might remain unfair for years. The goal is to stop paying the tax before the bill is even presented.
I love that.
It is to walk into the room, recognize the bias, and refuse to hand over 30% of your cognitive RAM to manage it.
And when Fatima finally did this work, when she addressed the root cause at the nervous system level, the external changes were profound precisely because they were so quiet.
They weren't flashy.
No. She stopped phrasing her mathematical certainties as questions. She stopped spending her Sunday nights over-preparing for a routine Tuesday update and instead prepared a normal, healthy amount.
She got her weekends back.
She got her time back. And most importantly, she took all those recovered hours, all that reclaimed cognitive processing power, and she applied it to her actual work.
To her innovation.
Yes, and to her life outside the office.
She detached her sense of safety from the room's perception of her identity. She learned to hold her evidence just as firmly as Marie Curie did, but without letting the friction of the room dictate her internal state.
We have covered immense ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at the pure, unfiltered identity bias faced by Marie Curie in 1911, and how a historic institution locked its doors in the face of unarguable genius simply because of where she was born and her gender.
And from there, we mapped that historic reality onto the modern corporate landscape through the experience of Fatima.
Right. We explored how the blatant rejections of the past have evolved into a quiet tax, the defensive preparation, the linguistic softening, and the slow internal habit of shrinking to fit a biased room.
And then we dove deep into the biological mechanics of stereotype threat, breaking down how the 1995 Steele and Aronson study and the 1999 Spencer, Steele, and Quinn study proved that this isn't an emotional failing.
It's a measurable cognitive hijacking.
Exactly. We saw how the threat of judgment literally drains the brain's working memory.
And we dismantled the toxic culture of empowerment advice, replacing it with Fuentes' nervous system-based approach. We discussed the necessity of active rehearsal and somatic regulation to rewrite our survival scripts, allowing high performers to reclaim their cognitive resources.
It's all about doing that deep physical rewiring.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, we ask you, the listener, to take a hard, honest look at your own professional life. Think about the meetings you have scheduled for this week.
Just observe yourself.
Are you presenting your hard-earned expertise as a question? Are you sacrificing your personal time to defensively prepare for a room that you already know the answers for? Are you paying an internal tax that the room hasn't actually asked for yet?
Recognizing that behavior is the first step toward reclaiming your bandwidth. But, this raises an important question that I want to leave you with, something to consider long after this deep dive ends.
Okay, what is it?
Well, we have spent this entire time focused intensely on the micro level, right? The internal toll this tax takes on the individual, the lost hours, the delayed promotions, the sheer physical exhaustion of carrying this weight.
Right, the personal cost.
But if we pull back and look at the macro level, the implications are just staggering. If stereotype threat is actively draining the cognitive RAM of our brightest, most capable minds, if the top-tier specialists, the brilliant engineers, the visionary creatives are burning 30% of their intellectual capacity just to manage the defensive posture required to exist in these rooms, what has the world lost?
Man, that is a haunting question.
It really is.
What world-changing ideas, what incredible technological innovations, what vital medical breakthroughs has society entirely missed out on simply because the people holding those ideas were too cognitively exhausted by the quiet tax to share them?
We aren't just losing individual potential, we are bottlenecking human progress.
Take that thought with you. Reclaim your cognitive resources, reset your nervous system, and the next time you walk into a room, we hope you occupy it at full height. We'll see you on the next deep dive.